Welcome to Conversations in the Void. I'm your host, Joshua Von Ammon. Joining me today is Michael A. Morris. Michael received his bachelor's degree from the University of North Texas. He went on to Chicago to do a post-bac at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and received his MFA from the University of Illinois in Chicago. It's an absolute pleasure having him on the show. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here.
So I guess we can sort of start this off and talk about some recent things. There was an exhibition that recently was at my studio and Eli Walker, Kelly Croner, the Union Studio and Gallery, a project called Exegesis, where you worked with Andrew Blanton and a number of other artists in a video performance. Maybe we can just talk a little bit about that briefly and then your own work going into it.
Yeah, that grouping of performances was myself doing a piece from the hermeneutics series, Scott Gresham Lancaster, Andrew Blanton, and then an ensemble that was organized by Joshua Westerman. So it was a really nice evening, and we had a great time. Great grouping of works, sort of loosely based around different generations of technology, sort of coming from early 20th century, mid-century avant-garde, and then sort of bleeding edge technologies as well, and how they interface with music and media.
So specifically, your piece fitting into that, I mean, like you said, it was sort of performed in this chronological order of the technology that they're dealing with. Andrew Blanton working with iPads, and yourself, maybe you can go in a little bit of detail about that particular piece, Third Hermeneutic.
Third Hermeneutic is the third in a series of projection pieces, all using 16 millimeter projection that's either augmented or is interacting with another technology in order to create sort of an immersive audiovisual space and performance. That particular piece is two 16 millimeter projectors that are, their projection is being fed back into a piece of software that I wrote in order to create an overlaid video projection that interacts with the film projection. So in that case, I was really interested in how that original projection would be reinterpreted by this other technology would produce some kind of real-time interaction. And in the series as a whole, I'm also interested in, different technologies talking to each other, yes, primarily, but also sort of getting at this idea of what it means, in a present situation, like in the present moment, to read something historically, and that's what the process of hermeneutics is. So I'm sort of using that idea of one technology reading another or interpreting another as sort of a metaphor for that process. But Third Hermeneutic is significant in the series because it's the first that's not fully abstract. It has text in it, so there's also this process of reading that the audience is doing while they're seeing this.
It was almost hypnotic, sort of repeat of this concept of history and its loss in translation. And well, there's a lot of things, but leave it to you to say it best. Well, we've interviewed some other artists like Kyle Evans and Alfredo Salazar Caro, and they kind of like, trying to shed a little bit more light on the area of new media in general and where they're working and how they differentiate among each other. And I'm curious to see or to talk about a little bit more about, your idiosyncratic sort of approach and like the things that you're dealing with as it sort of is separate from that, or like where you're fitting into that.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned those two fellows. I respect both of their work a lot. And I think Kyle and I in particular have a lot of overlap in the way we work because we're using older technologies and reinterpreting them through things that are much more present and current. I don't quite want to admit that the film technology that I'm using is obsolete, but I think he would certainly say that the cathode ray tube technology is obsolete. I'm not ready to admit that yet, but nonetheless, there was something that when you asked Alfredo about Kyle's work, I actually thought was really interesting. Where he sort of differentiated what they were doing. He had said that Kyle was more interested in circuit bending and he was more interested in data bending. So there was this dichotomy of the sort of the physical versus the software side of things. And I feel like I'm interested in that dialogue too, in trying to give some kind of a body or like a physical existence back to something that's ephemeral or bodiless.
Well, I mean, running with that over the last few years, I mean, following your work, I was kind of curious, like, what kind of sort of evolution you found in your process. I mean, you're very process heavy, and there's been a significant development. I mean, you go between the abstract and then using this sort of narrative oriented dialogues. I'm just curious a little bit about what, just reaching a little bit far backward and where you're at now, like to show some evolution there. You might talk about in concept that has been interesting to you as of late.
Let's see. I think I can see sort of a development in my work and this sort of tension between sort of a real interest in process and in sort of finding ways to work with abstraction and with sort of what we might call structural kinds of ways of working, sort of looking back at avant-garde filmmakers of a certain generation in the 60s and 70s that were really interested in articulating what the technology does to the viewing environment. I'm really interested in that, or what the recording medium might mean in a certain context. So I'm really interested in that, but I feel like I've always been a little bit of a storyteller too. I mean, my early education was in narrative cinema, so I feel like I've retained a little bit of that impulse, even though recent works have been almost fully abstract. I think I've wanted to sort of narrativize some aspect of the way they were created through the way the process works. So I think it retains some part of that. What I'm interested in lately in works that I'm working on now is actually maybe trying to figure out how to reclaim story, so or narrative, and I think third hermeneutic is maybe part of that. It's maybe more of an essay than it is a narrative, but I'm interested in that. There have been lots of films I've seen recently that have sort of maybe hinted at this kind of loss of the ability to tell a story. So I'm interested in maybe reclaiming that in my practice.
Well, I thought it was kind of interesting, at least my take on that. I mean, you had said earlier that you wouldn't want to call what you're working with as obsolete technology. However, I guess when I was experiencing third hermeneutic, my immediately go-to when you're talking about history and things being lost was both this idea of history and experience, but also the medium that you're actually working with. I mean, was that something that is that something you were thinking about at all? Or?
Definitely so. I mean, I feel like each medium, and this is debatable, I think, clearly, but each medium has its own way of being experienced. And even if we're still talking about different ways of exhibiting moving images, I think they have their like individual qualities that have like a certain psychic quality to them. So,
and even further, I mean, like a medium itself, as time moves forward, it becomes a thing that has a place in history. So your reaction to it and how you interact with it is going to constantly change as you move forward. Right. I mean, like to see film in 1974 is obviously a very different experience to see film now, even though it's the same thing. If you see the same thing in two periods,
That's why we need hermeneutics, is because the process of going back and reading something that's from a historical tradition, there's some kind of a process of adding to that or producing something in the encounter. So, you read a historical text, you read something that you don't have any connection to anymore, maybe the Bible. I mean, the Bible is sort of where, that discipline of hermeneutics first comes to us through theology. And there's a disconnect between you and that thing. So there's an act of, like a productive act in the process of reading. So I think we're always making something new. So, whenever we're in the process of experiencing it. So that's a big interest to me.
Awesome.
And that's, certainly where the hermeneutic series comes from.
Awesome. Well, we're running near the end of time, but I did want to ask you, I mean, you've shown across the U.S. and in Canada. You've been busy as of late. Is there anything you want to throw out, that's coming up in the near future?
I am going to be traveling to Winnipeg in a couple weeks to present Second Hermeneutic, actually. I've been touring Second Hermeneutic around at a festival called Winnipeg Underground Film Festival. I was just in Portland at Experimental Film Festival Portland. It's a great little festival. And I don't have a ton of other exhibitions on the docket after that. I'm trying to make some new work over the summer, trying to initiate some new projects, but also working on some curatorial projects. So I'm involved with Dallas Video Fest, the Video Association of Dallas, and we've got our main festival coming up in the fall, but then we're also working on a new project that's really just gravitating around video art in the gallery and also single channel video art and experimental film, trying to find a better way to exhibit that. So we're going to be doing that at the McKinney Avenue Contemporary in January, and we'll be announcing that coming soon.
Awesome. Well, it's an absolute pleasure having you on this show. I mean, it's been fantastic talking to you. I hope to talk to you again in the near future, and best of luck in the meanwhile.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for tuning in. Join us next week for another episode of Conversations in the Void.
The sense of a city is war. Every day was dark by 4. 5 layers of clothing enveloped me for months. I sat at tables with famous alcoholics who hated their girlfriends. We sang songs that didn't exist under archways and parks filled with lurkers. I was on a bicycle in Bed-Stuy pedaling through the Marcy houses, and I kept my head down, and the dealers on the block called me Snowflake, and I could see their legs jutting out from the stoops and missing my wheels by inches. My friends loved me because I was angry and depressed. Love was depressing and made me angry. I only ate ethnic food. I saw a girl getting mugged by a 14-year-old boy, and she wouldn't let go of her purse, so he hit her, and she struck him back and bloodied his nose, and he ran. 2 children sat across from me on the train, sipping strawberry wine coolers and giggling, and when they caught me staring, they offered me some, and I took it. I saw a man dressed in a gray flannel peacoat and pinstripe slacks, vomiting from the sidewalk into the subway grate at 9 a.m. on Court Street, surely on his way to work in the midst of a bender. I watched from a bookstore window and laughed because nobody else would laugh. I ate tapas in a Spanish dump in the village, and a rat crawled around at my feet until the waiter stomped it out with his boot heel, and I never ate their meatballs on a stick again. From the back of a cab, I saw 3 men beating another in the street with pipes, taking turns as they slowly lifted the long cylindrical pieces into the air and swung downward into bones and guts. I replaced tacos with falafel. I slept with a woman to get over another. I told her so, and she preferred it that way. I wrote flirtatious notes in a moleskin journal and flashed them at beautiful strangers on the West 4th Street platform like a pervert unzipping his fly. Sometimes they blushed, but mostly they loathed me. I smiled and stared upward at the sky in a constant state of longing, and it made me look like a tourist, and so came the sighs and rolling eyes and passive-aggressive nudges from passers-by. I sat on a bar stool scribbling lyrics on a wet napkin while the next man over berated and spit on me, and the bartender handed me a wet napkin, then poured a drink on the house. I saw mafioso on 3rd Avenue, gangbangers on Nevin Street, a homeless man called Jenkins who chewed barbed wire for money and was in an eternal state of bleeding, and 5 brothers from Yemen who worked in the bodega across the street, who took turns coming to America, sleeping on cots in the back room, raising money to send back to their wives and children for food, shelter, and to help fund an eventual revolution that was at the time in its infancy. I moved through my neighborhood with an iPod on and earbuds blaring. I grew out my hair and maneuvered between clusters of school kids on field trips and was pleased by their exuberance and for a moment forgot how alone I was. Even surrounded by friends, I felt doomed. Not because they couldn't understand me or because they didn't love me or because I was tragic or whatever. It was because I'd forgot what I was doing here and couldn't remember. I'd wanted something and I got it, and it wasn't what I wanted anymore. People were rare coin collections gathered and displayed in the glass cases of Manhattan skyscrapers, everyone obsessed over their current market value. Meanwhile, I felt nausea while sitting cross-legged in a 6th-floor cafe with a satchel full of ballyshag and papers, feeling the movement of trains below, my scarf knotted around my neck like a noose, listening to the next table over debate the relative merits of atheism in the Knicks, and me thinking there is nothing more obnoxious than an atheist basketball fan.